Hey everybody, it's Damien from Guitar Journey here. Maybe you've had somebody tell you, well, C major and A minor are the same thing. Or maybe somebody said to you, you know, there are these things called relative keys where two different keys have the same notes. Or maybe you've looked at something called the circle of fifths and you've wondered why certain keys are sort of aligned with each other on the circle. Or maybe you've been practicing your scales and you've noticed that, you know, for example, when you play a D major pentatonic scale, maybe like right here, well, that seems to look an awful lot like a B minor pentatonic scale. We're going to go through all that today, and by the end of today's lesson, you're going to understand what we mean when we say that two keys, what we call relative keys, have the same notes. And you're also going to understand how that relates to actually playing the guitar. Now, first off, I want you to accept a basic idea. Yeah, it really is true that two different keys can have the same notes. And yeah, we call these keys relative keys. They're related to each other. And this can be kind of tricky for your brain when you're first learning music. It's a little bit like I'm sitting here telling you something is black and white at the same time. How can it be two different things? And even if we sort of get our brains to accept that the idea that two different keys can be made up of the same notes, you might be wondering, well, why is this? Or for that matter, why is it important? It reminds me of something a private student of mine said to me recently. He was struggling a little bit with the idea, and he asked a very, very reasonable question. He said, you know, if two keys like C major and A minor have the same notes, why not just call it one name? Call it C major or call it A minor and be done with it. Why are we calling it by two different names? And for that matter, you might also find yourself asking another question, which is, if I just play my scale, how do I know that I'm playing, for example, C major or A minor? Let's clear all that up. So again, please, for now, just take it on faith that what you've been told or maybe what you've read or seen really is true, that two different keys can have the same notes, and we say these keys are related to each other. They are relative keys. And I really don't want right now to get into a deep music theory explanation of why this is. I'm not going to tell you, well, oh, the relative minor is the sixth scale degree, the sixth mode of the major scale, and blah, 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 blah. That's all useful information. I don't mean to say it's not, but it's probably not the information that you need right now. Instead, I want us to take a really practical approach today. I don't want us to get into the why, because that does kind of involve a lot of music theory, and that's great, but that might not be the most helpful thing right now. So instead of answering the question why, we're going to try to answer the question how, as in, how do I know if I'm playing the major scale or the minor scale, and how do I apply this knowledge? Let's answer the first question first. How do I know whether I'm playing the major scale or the minor scale? The sample scale that I'm going to use today is my C major diatonic scale. My pinky is going to be on the 8th fret of the 6th string, which is a C note, my root note. And when I play it a couple of octaves, it looks and sounds like this. Okay. Now, there's our C major scale, okay? I've been talking about C major and A minor and saying that they somehow have the same notes. So if I play my A minor scale, I'm going to demonstrate an A minor scale. I'm going to put my index finger on the 6th string at the 5th fret, which really is an A note, and the scale's going to look and sound like this. This is A minor. So C major, A minor. So you can see they're the same notes. And some of you might be thinking, or some of you may have been told, well, if I start on the C note, then it's going to be C major. And if I start on the A note, it's going to be A minor. This is a helpful way to kind of get oriented. It's a helpful way for you to organize your practice, you know. But honestly, that's not really a complete answer at all. Yeah, if I'm just practicing my scales one day and I decide to practice a bunch of C major scales, I'm going to start on the C note probably. Why wouldn't I? And if I'm thinking about practicing a bunch of minor scales, I'll probably start on the A note. Again, why wouldn't I? So in terms of getting organized on the neck and having a sense of organization in our practice, recognizing the starting note is a good idea. But the idea that, well, if you start on the C note, it's C major. If you start on the A note, it's A minor. That's not a complete answer. And to demonstrate that it's not a complete answer, I'm going to do something really dumb. I'm going to do something really silly. I'm going to play my scale, and I am going to start on the C note for whatever that's worth, and I'm probably going to miss a few notes on the way, but this is me playing my scale. Okay, quick now. Was that C major or A minor? I mean, your answer could be either, or both, or neither, or whatever. Here's what it comes down to. When you're trying to understand the difference between the major scale and the minor scale, in this case C major or A minor, I don't really want you to think of what is the starting note as much. Like I said, that's helpful to organize your practice, but it's really not a complete answer. Instead, I want you to think of two things, and I want you to think of emphasis, and I want you to think of context. When I talk about emphasis, all I really mean is that if you're playing your scale, if you're improvising using your scale, for example, if you tend to emphasize more C notes, it'll tend to probably sound more like C major. And of course, if you emphasize more A notes, it'll tend to sound more like A minor. So if I play a lick like this, and I'm going to go, okay? I landed on the C note to conclude the lick, and it pretty much sounded like C major. Note that I didn't start on the C note, though. Anyways, I'm going to do one more lick, and if I do this, well, that definitely sounded a little bit more like A minor. And I didn't begin on the A note, but I did end on the A note. Now you might be watching this and saying, you know, honestly, I don't hear that much of a difference. And if you are saying that, that's totally okay, because it's to some degree, it's a subtle difference. But that raises a question. If we're not sure that we're playing C major or A minor based on the starting note, and even if by emphasizing or concluding on certain notes, the difference is sort of a subtle one, is there another factor that really helps us determine whether something is the relative major or the relative minor? The answer is yes, and that thing is context. Think of this situation. You're jamming with your friends or with a band, or you're playing along to some jam tracks at home, and the chord sequence that you're playing over is C major to F major to G7 back to C. C major, F major, G7 back to C. Now let's not get into the why of it again, you know, but trust me when I tell you that that chord sequence is about as C major gets. And you know something? If you use this scale over a backing track that consists of those chords, I don't care what note you start on. I don't care what note you start your scale on or start your lick on. For that matter, I don't even care that much about which notes you choose to emphasize. If you work this scale over that chord sequence, it's gonna sound like C major. The chord sequence, the underlying harmony, pulls our ear so strongly to orient around C that the series of notes, you know, these can't help sounding like anything other than C major. Here's a really short example of what I mean. I'm going to play over a jam track real quick, and the jam track consists of that same chord sequence, C, F, G7, C. And I'm pretty much, no matter what I'm working within my scale, it's going to sound like C major. Let's hear how it sounds. Okay, That was C major. Now by contrast, let's say you're playing over a chord sequence of A minor to D minor to G, back to A minor, D minor, G, back to A minor. Well, I'm going to use the very same scale fingering and honestly almost the same solo, not exactly the same, but quite similar. And again, it really doesn't matter what note I start my scale or my licks on. It doesn't even matter all that much which notes I choose to emphasize. With a chord sequence like that, this scale right here, again, doesn't matter what note I start on, is going to sound like A minor, whether I like it or not. So I'm going to play over that backing track with those chords, A minor, D minor, G, and you're going to hear that the licks that I play are quite similar to the solo that I played earlier in C major, but it's going to sound like A minor. Same scale, same notes, totally different feel, okay? And that feel was largely dictated by the chords, the underlying harmony. So to answer the critical question of how do you know that you're playing a minor scale or a major scale, it's not really the starting note. It's really about, to some degree, which notes you emphasize, but it's also about where our ear gets pulled by the chords over which we're playing. This is what I like to call the musical context. The chords, the underlying harmony, really do weigh very heavily in whether we're playing C major or A minor or whatever relative keys we happen to be working with. So that question that my student asked, why not call it by one name and save the trouble? Well, we answer that question by saying that although the notes are the same, as you heard today, the two relative keys we worked with today, C major and A minor, really are different. They have a totally different vibe about them, a totally different feel. They have different personalities, you might say. So it really does make sense to think of them as different, distinct keys. Although they are, yes, they are, here's that word again, they are related keys, they are relative keys, okay? Now one final practical note real quick. Sometimes students, even after they understand the idea of relative keys, still have difficulty applying the concept. They know all their diatonic scale fingerings, but then they have a little bit of difficulty applying them. And I've had people come to me and say that they know their major scales and could I teach them some minor scales? And then I explained that if they know their major scales, they just need to understand relative keys and then they'll be able to play in the minor keys. They don't need to learn new scale fingerings. But then, you know, even if they do understand relative keys, or they say they do, somehow they still get tripped up. They sort of have a mental block that's kind of like, well, how can I be playing a major scale in a minor key? So, like I said, it's a mental block. And even when I tell them, well, just look at the circle of fifths and understand that if you want to play in C major, if you want to play in A minor, you can just play the C major scales that you already know instead of learning a bunch of new fingerings. Sometimes that just doesn't register with some people. So I'm gonna leave you with kind of a final thought that may help you if you're kind of struggling with this mental roadblock. Instead of saying to yourself that when you want to play, for example, A minor, you're going to play C major scales, let's swap in a word or two. Say to yourself instead, if I want to play in A minor, I will borrow scale fingerings from C major. The use of the word borrow, I think, is actually kind of helpful here. I'll borrow scale fingerings from the related key of C major. I don't need to learn any new scale fingerings for A minor. Again, that word borrow. When we say we're borrowing scales from C major, we're acknowledging that A minor and C major, although they are related, they really are distinct. They really are different. But just because the notes happen to be the same but because the notes happen to be the same, there's no point in learning different scale fingerings. Just borrow the fingerings from C major and your A minor soloing will be just right, okay? All right, that's what I have for you today. I really hope today's discussion cleared things up for you. And if it did, please hit the like button and also please hit subscribe. We have so much content here on the Guitar Journey channel and there's new content coming all the time. I really love helping people navigate this awesome journey that is learning and playing the guitar. So please hit like, please hit subscribe. And if you want to, leave me a comment as well. Or if you have a question about today's lesson or about anything else guitar related, leave a comment. Okay, I love hearing from you. I really do believe we're building a community here. Okay, and I believe that we can enrich each other's respective guitar journeys. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.